LSVI Trojans and anyone else who happened to stumble upon this video. Today I'm going to talk to y'all a little bit about mummification, and we're going to actually try an experiment. So this is actually going to be a two-part video because our experiment is going to have to sit for a few days, and possibly you will be able to actually do the experiment with me if you have some of the things that we're using. But first I want to talk about what mummification is before we get on to the experiment. Mummification is a process that the ancient Egyptians used to do. In this process, they took a body and they preserved it. Mummies are actually still, we find, not very often admittedly, but they have found mummies that are still very well preserved even today, even though they're thousands of years old. So mummification, let's talk about what that is. The ancient Egyptians believed in an afterlife when somebody died. Mummification would help someone reach the afterlife because they believed that in order to have this afterlife, you had to be able, your spirit had to be able to repossess your body. So they needed the body to stay as true to form as possible. The only way the spirit could do this is if they could recognize the body. Now, mummification was a long process, and so if it's a long process, that means it's expensive. So because of that, only the wealthy were actually mummified. They had a chief embalmer who would wear a mask, the mask of Anubis, who was their god of the dead. Anubis was a jackal-headed god, so he had the body of a human, but a jackal for a head. So first thing they would have to do, well, this gets a little gross. They have to get all the internal organs out first, and so they kind of scramble up the brain through the nose, stick a hook up there, and they get it to come out that way. Then they have to cut an incision in the body so they can pull out all the organs, and they put those in some very decorative canisters, or jars I should call them, I guess. They have to let everything dry, but in order to preserve the body, they have to dry it out as much as possible. Now, in order to do that, they used what was called Natron. It's like a salt, and they would actually pack the body in this for about 70 days to get as much moisture out as possible. After about 40 days, they would actually start stuffing the body with linen and sand to give it a more human shape, because as it dried out, it kind of flattened a little bit. And after 70 days, they'd wrap the body from head to toe in linens, which is a type of material, and they would place it in a sarcophagus. Sarcophagus being a box, like a coffin, basically. Very nice, fancy word. And if it was a pharaoh or the Egyptian king, he'd be placed in a very nice burial chamber. So that's all we're going to really talk about with that. So if you've taken social studies with me, 6th grade social studies specifically, then you're probably thinking, oh, we've already done this. But if you haven't, or if we didn't do this experiment in your class, well, here's something new for you. And if you're in one of the younger grades and you end up taking 6th grade social studies with me, well, just pretend you haven't done it before when we get in class, okay? All right, so first things first for this mummification idea. I've done this before with hot dogs, and frankly, at the end of it, I didn't even want to measure the hot dogs again because I couldn't stand to open the container. It stunk so bad. I've done it with apples and it worked fairly well. But, not really supposed to be running around all over town buying stuff. So because of that, I don't have any apples to use. But I found in my fridge potatoes. So we're going to use potatoes today, and we're going to see how it works out. So I've got some potatoes, and students, if you decide that you want to do this with me, please, please, please make sure your mom's okay with you taking the potato, or whoever, dad, whoever's house you're at. because I don't want you to go in the fridge and grab their baking potato that they were planning on baking for dinner tonight. They won't be happy with you and they won't be happy with me. So make sure you ask your parents before you go and grab a potato or an apple or whatever. Okay, so I got the potatoes. I also have a potato peeler here. If you don't know really well how to use this, how to do it safely, make sure your parents help you, please. You can peel off a layer of skin from your hand just as easily as you can peel off a layer of skin from your potato. Okay, I don't want to hear about anybody getting injured on that. I have a tape measure here, and this one's one of those flexible ones because I want to be able to wrap it around my potato. I, of course, have a pad of paper and a pen to record observations. Plastic baggie. Big old thing of salt. Again, ask your parents before you go steal their salt, because if you use their whole thing of salt and they go to use it later when they go to cook dinner, they're not going to be happy with us. So make sure you got their permission. And then a thing that I added in, because in the information I gave you, I told you how they would pack the body in salt. But in history, we've also seen where people got normal burials out in the desert and the dry air ended up mummifying them. So they weren't actually, they didn't do the embalming process, but they were mummified naturally. So because of that, I've actually got this lovely, lovely dehydrator right here. So we're gonna actually use that thing too, and we're gonna see how that works in comparison to using the salt. Now, again, it's good to go ahead and make sure your parents are cool with you doing this, just so that they don't run across it and throw it all away or something. Okay, so first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take my potatoes, I'm gonna peel them real quick. Just some quick, doesn't have to be perfect. The only reason I'm doing this is because I want the salt or the air or whatever to really hit the, guess what you'd call this, flesh of the potato. I don't know how it would do if I did it with the skin on. In fact, that might actually be a good idea for me to try that and see what that does. So I got my potato nice and peeled. All right. Now, before I do anything else, I want to have a starting point, because otherwise, what am I really going to learn from this? So I'm going to take my potato and I'm going to put my tape measure around it to see how big around my potato actually is. And it's coming out at about, is that a 6 or a 9? A 6. About 6 inches around. So I'm going to go ahead and write that on my paper. 6 inches around. All right. And if I measured the other way, because I only measured one way on this, right? Looks like I actually got a pretty round potato. Looks like it's 6 inches, period. So that's pretty awesome. Now, as I sit here with my potato, I'm looking how thick it is, and I'm wondering, is this thing gonna dry quickly? But we're gonna give it a try. So, I'm gonna take a Ziploc bag. I'm gonna take my salt. Pour a whole bunch of salt in here. Whole bunch of salt. If my mom opened the pantry and she had found as a child that I'd used all her salt, well, if my dad had, because he usually cooked, ooh, they wouldn't have been thrilled with me come dinner time. Okay, so I'm gonna pour some more salt. It's gonna be the world's saltiest potato. Ooh, using up all my salt. All right, I'm gonna kind of squeeze some of the air out of this. And I'm gonna Ziploc it closed. And you know, I'm gonna do what I can to kind of bury my potato in there. Like at this point, I don't really see my potato. And I'm gonna put this somewhere where it's gonna sit at least all weekend. We can check up on it on Monday, but it might, because this potato is kind of thick, it might actually take longer than that. So we don't wanna be opening the bag. We don't wanna be playing with it or anything like that. We definitely don't want this bag to bust because that'll be a mess. And we're gonna leave this thing sitting over the weekend. So I'm gonna set that aside. Now that's normally what I like. Okay, I just spilled a little salt. Gotta clean that up in a minute. So that's normally what I do. But I like to see what else is gonna happen. So here's the thing, if you wanted, you could do this and use baking soda for a second potato. You could use water for a third potato, and you could, I don't know what other, maybe flour for another potato. Okay, the longer we leave this sitting, the better our results are gonna end up being. So by Monday, it might not be a long enough time for us to really check this. But if you are going to do multiple potatoes, make sure you get a Sharpie and you label the bag, okay? Because when you go to look at this in a couple of days, that salt and that baking soda and all that, it's gonna have a different texture to it as it's absorbing the water out of this potato. So you can do different substances to see which one will actually absorb the most water out of the potato, which one's gonna mummify your potato the best. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna peel my second potato. Just give me just a second here. All right, I got enough of the peeling off. It doesn't have to be perfect. What I'm gonna do now, I guess I need to measure it before I do anything else, right? I'm about to forget that step. Let's see. Looks like this one is about, I'm gonna say 6.5 by 7. So about 6.5 by 7. Let me write that down. 6.5 by 7. And I'm also writing down that the 6-inch potato was the one that we put in the bag of salt. Okay. Now I'm going to take this wonderful spud here, and I'm going to open up my dehydrator. And sorry if the focus is not great. I can't really see what the camera's getting. And I'm going to just stick it on here and hope that it's, ooh. Well, that's interesting. See, the problem is my potato is too thick, so the dehydrator will not close on it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut this thing in half. So give me just a second, and I'm going to be back with a knife. All right, I'm back with my knife. I got myself a nice little serrated blade. What I mean by serrated is that it has that bumpy texture at the bottom. So it's not a smooth blade. All right, so I'm gonna take my lovely potato and I'm gonna split this sucker in half, being careful not to cut myself because I kind of like my fingers. Now, okay, now that I've cut it, looks like this, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna measure it again to see what it's like now. And since I have a flat surface, what I'm going to do is measure it this way instead of around. So it's about 2.5 inches this way and 2 inches this way. So 2.5 by 2. Hey, I'm just cutting in here. I realized that I didn't say it out loud, but I did show it. When I said I'm gonna measure this way and then that way, I was looking at the flat side of the potato that I had just cut, and I was measuring the length, and then I was measuring the width of the flat side. So I'm gonna take my potato once again, and I'm gonna put it down on my dehydrator, and I'm gonna close this up. And y'all, don't worry if you don't have a dehydrator, because, well, frankly, I think most people don't. And I'm going to take this thing, and sorry, I've got to come around to this side to grab the plug. And I'm going to plug this thing in. Trying to do it while holding the camera still. Okay. Now, if you listen, you can hear that there is air blowing. If I open this thing up, right here on the top, this little, well, this around the edge is blowing air. This right here, sorry, I just moved. So this around the edge is blowing the air. This right here is sucking the air up. So the air gets blown down here through this groove, and it starts coming up through all this grid, and that's the air is going to dry out this potato. Okay, so basically, for those of you that can't see it, dehydrator, all it is, it's a plastic thing that has, I guess the best I can say, you know those, when you get the strawberries and those, well, now they just use a plastic thing, huh? Basically, it's a circular piece of plastic that has all these grooves cut in it so that air can flow through it. And you put your items on top of the plastic. Then you close up the machine and it draws air through so that the thing, whatever you put on there, just slowly dries. Okay, so I'm going to set that there. I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to say that's it for today. Now, come Monday, we're going to check on this, see how it's doing, and we may even do a third video by next Friday where we see how our stuff stands at that point. So, I hope this has given you a little bit of information about mummification. I hope it also gave you a fun activity to do, or just to watch. So, thank you very much for hanging in there with me, and thanks for doing an experiment with me. We'll see y'all later. I know I said I was done, but I've got one more thing to say. Well, a couple more things to say. First of all, when I was describing the dehydrator, and I said the air is blowing here and then it's coming up here. Basically, I wanted to explain a little bit more for the students that couldn't see it. It is like a convection oven, or similar. The idea is that the warm air is blowing down the sides of the machine, and then it gets pulled up in the middle, so it makes kind of a circular pattern of the air. So I just want to point that out. Basically, it blows air down, it sucks air back up, and it creates just this wind tunnel effect. Also, if you want to use some other materials, like to try and dehydrate these, I said possibly water, baking soda. You could use vinegar. And so at the end of this, I did go ahead and do another one that was in baking soda. So I challenge you before the day is up, I challenge you, go ahead, or before you finish with this experiment, write down your thoughts. What do you think? What's going to work the best? Is it going to work best in the salt, or is a jar of water with a potato in it going to work best to dehydrate and mummify this potato? What do you think the texture of the baking soda would be like at the end of a week? Do you think that the salt's going to do better than the dehydrator? So I challenge you to go ahead and think about this for a few minutes and go ahead and write down your thoughts. At the end of this, when we check on our results, then you're going to have the chance to see, was I right? Or did things turn out differently than I expected? I'll tell you, sometimes the results have surprised my students in the past, and sometimes they were exactly what my students expected. Have a great afternoon, y'all. Hey, y'all. So I realize that I have now told you goodbye like twice, and I'm back yet again, but this is going to be the last one, I promise. I was thinking about it, and I realized some of you might not exactly know what I'm talking about when I say form a hypothesis. You probably have an idea, but what am I looking for in this? And so let's go ahead and we're going to look at it together. So first of all, we have a potato in the dehydrator. So first things first, write down what you think is going to happen in that dehydrator. I think the potato in the dehydrator will, do you think this thing is going to stay the same? Do you think it's going to shrink to half its size? Do you think it's going to curl up into a little bitty knot? Maybe you think it's going to get bigger. What do you think is going to happen in that dehydrator when we check it in a few days? Then you're going to do the same thing with the salt. I think the potato in the salt is going to, and tell me what you think. And any other substance, we've got the baking powder or baking soda also. Write down, I think the one in the baking soda is going to. So tell me, what do you think is going to happen? And then get really brave. And at the end, tell me, which one do you think is going to work best? And do you think that our results for the second time we check it are going to be different than our results for the third time? Do you think one of these methods is going to work really fast and the other one's going to work way better? Maybe you think the baking soda will work the fastest. So on day 3 or 4, that one's going to look the smallest. But maybe by the time we get to day, what is it, 7? Day 7 or 8, maybe you think it's going to end up being the salt that did it the best. So go ahead, write down your hypothesis so that when we get to the end of it, you know if you were right. Catch you later.